Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire's Business of America podcast with your host, Jerry Rogers.
Welcome to another edition of the Business of America podcast. Again, I say this every week. I'll say it again. Why should I stop being me? Every show is the most important show. Every episode, we're bringing to you the doers, the makers, the innovators of those who make America run. And yesterday, a little backstory here. So as you all know, I have 5 children. And my oldest, I'm very proud of. And they're at Catholic University. In fact, my one daughter today just texted me that she just took her last class. Graduation is coming up in May. Anyway, yesterday or day before yesterday, it was yesterday, my older daughter, Bridget, sends me a piece from the Wall Street Journal. Now, mind you, this is unusual. I get music updates and, Dad, do you want to go to a concert? And so I click on it, and there it is, a piece that I had already linked at Real Clear Policy earlier in the day. And it's by a gentleman, Timothy Patrick Carney, who I've known now, or I've been acquainted with for, a decade plus. And it's a great piece about what children need in terms of being able to bike and go outdoors and all these sorts of things. Now, I'll let Tim give his own resume, but this is someone who is doing, I think, some of the most important thinking and doing when it comes to family matters. So today's podcast, The Business of America, is really going to be about families are the business of America. You know, Teddy Roosevelt, you're in the arena. It's easy to criticize, easy to yell at and say you're doing it wrong. But the men and women in the arena making things happen, this is what makes America run. And frankly, I can't think of anything more important than the American family. And Tim Carney, welcome, Tim.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Give us a rundown. I know Washington Examiner, AEI, author, former Regnery editor. By the way, my beautiful wife was an editor there too, and on and on and on. I mean, you have been everywhere that I read and I consider important. But give us a rundown of your resume.
Well, I've been in Washington for 25 years. Most importantly, I'm a husband and a dad of 6.
Yes.
And so I started. Bob Novak was my second job out of college. He was a great columnist, and I say that was my grad school. But I've been in DC and now at AEI for over 12 years, about 4 years as a full-time fellow. And I wrote a book 5 years ago called Alienated America about the collapse of community and how that's the most important story of the last 50 years. And I thought that was the most important consequence of that is the collapse in family. Exactly what you're talking about. Reduction in marriage and the collapse in the birth rate. We just got new numbers, a record low birth rate in the U.S., along with rising childhood anxiety. And so that's what spurred me to write my new book, Family Unfriendly. My earlier books are about crony capitalism, which are fun. You and I have talked about that a lot. Yep. But the community and family stuff, I think, is more important.
And I also think this, because, my job is similar to yours, and that is I have to read, I have to research, I have to be in the company of politicians and the hangers-on, the policy makers, and those who write. And I start this early in the morning. 5 a.m. I'm up, I'm reading the journals, I'm reading everything so I could populate Real Clear Policy, Real Clear Health, editing originals. By 9 o'clock in the morning, I am thoroughly depressed. Mm-hmm. And what I come back to, Tim, is frankly what you're writing about, and that is the future of America. And I just spoke with Joel Kotkin, who's a professor out in California, has done some good work on energy issues, and he talks very specifically about how he thinks Gen Z might be the saviors of America in so much as they're going to be forced to deal with some of the problems that we've created. And he talked about marrying later, not having children, putting work first, not having dinner with your kids. Mm-hmm. And so what you're doing, I think, in terms of advancing good policy, but also just framing how can we make the future better, I think you're right in the thick of it. So tell us a little bit about your book and some of the challenges and some of the prescriptions to fix things?
Sure. So once again, there's a epidemic of childhood anxiety. This has been declared by pediatricians, psychiatrists, psychologists, etc. And since 2006, when my wife and I had our first kid, since that was like a mini baby boom, since then, we've had fewer babies every year. And last year was the low point. Last year was below even the lowest point of the pandemic. And so we're doing something wrong, is my argument, because it's bad. I mean, childhood anxiety is obviously bad, but a low and falling birth rate is bad. It's bad for the economy. I think it makes us worse people. Having little kids around makes us better, so having fewer makes us worse. I think it reflects something sick about our society. And some people think there's a simple economic explanation for this, and economics is part of it, and we should talk about that, particularly housing costs. But the housing difficulty is only in the last few years. The baby bust has been going on for 15, 16 years. And it can't just be about economics. Having kids is not actually more unaffordable than it used to be. It seems that way for some cultural reasons. Gen Z and millennials aren't actually poorer than the Gen Xers like you and me, or than the baby boomers were. And so it's really, there's a cultural problem at the root here. And so that's what I try to explore, is how is our culture family unfriendly, from parenting culture to mating and dating culture to our cultural values?
I think, again, this might sound simple, but, I'm similar to you. I think, I've coached all my kids, track, soccer. I'm not a very good soccer coach. Football, I've coached football. I'm now coaching baseball. My youngest, is playing baseball. And people ask me all the time, and I have the opportunity to be I have a radio show on Sundays, and I do a lot of work, and people know I'm a coach. In fact, in certain scenarios or circumstances, people refer to me as coach. Mm-hmm. Here's the number one question I get, Tim. Coach, if you were to give one bit of advice, I hate that, the one bit of advice, but one bit of advice on how to raise good men, good women, strong men, strong women, what would that bit of advice be? And they're expecting me to say something, don't cheat on your drills, show up late. If you're on time, you're already late. And my counsel is very simple, because it's worked in my family. And that is, have dinner with your children. Mm-hmm. Have dinner, listen to them, what's going on in their schools. So I ask you the question, I'm not going to ask you for one bit of advice, but how can we, as dads, as coaches, as teachers, those who engage with children, how can we build them up better than we're doing?
Well, a big part of it is remembering what's really at stake. And this is hard in sports, right? I'm a competitive guy. And what drives kids in sports is competition. So you have to say, like, let's go out there and win. You have to congratulate them when they do well. You have to encouraging them to practice and do better. But as the adult in the room, you have to remember, St. Peter's not going to ask us for a win-loss percentage when we're at the end of our lives, right? That the point of this, the youth sports, is building virtues, is learning how to be a good teammate, learning how to win well and how to lose well, learning that when you work hard at something, you can get better at it, but that ultimately you're never guaranteed success. You can work hard to increase your chances, but you're never guaranteed it. I always think of my son in the same year, because on two different teams, go from being the star of the team to the last guy on the bench. And what a great experience it was to have both of those bookends. And so chapter 1 of my book is about the title is Have Lower Ambitions for Your Kids. Now, obviously that's tongue in cheek, right? Because I want my kids to be exactly what you're talking about. Men and women of virtue. I want them to get to heaven. But when it comes to sports or music or even to some extent academics, I know that what actually matters is not those measurable outcomes, but how is this helping them become the man or woman that I want them to be as an adult? So that's sort of That's a tough sort of big picture thing. And what you're talking about with have dinner with your kids, that's exactly, as a family, that's exactly that. It's reminding them what really matters. And it's being in touch and keeping open those lines of communication.
You know, we'll get to the economics, but you've said that you've said something now twice, and I think, frankly, it's the most important thing in life. I want my children to be in heaven. When we pray as a family, the first thing I pray is, you know, Lord, I want this circle, the seven of us, not to be broken later. I want this circle for eternity. And again, people express their faith differently. I think you and I share a similar faith. But faith, you know, faith is expressed in different ways. Virtue is important, values, right and wrong, truth. So whether it's eternity for people of faith, or whether it's teaching right and wrong for someone who's more secular, we've seemed to have lost that. I think culturally wise, we have not, yes. we have not given young people the gift of boundaries. Again, the sports analogy. Imagine playing baseball without innings, without outs, without a foul, without foul lines. Football without the out of bounds. On and on. Much of what we're handing off to young people is this kind of know your own truth, speak your own truth. We had this controversy with NPR, the new CEO, and part of the controversy is that she wants to speak her own truth, and we've moved away from the truth. Can we get back some of that? Can we instill virtue, faith in young people?
Yes, and I'm going to agree, but propose a little caveat.
And you can disagree with me.
Yeah. So, but to some extent, I would describe some of the problem as the opposite, which is, yes, kids need boundaries. They need guidance. You don't tell your kid, here's a blank page, write your life script on it. But that is, by the way, exactly that's what the public schools told you and me and when we were kids. It's what social media, they say the medium is the message. The message of social media is whatever you want to decide you are, whether on any score, including whether you're a boy or a girl, you're going to rewrite that totally from scratch, and never let anybody tell you who you are. Never define yourself by some institution you belong to or your parents want. Never be a role player. All of those are that bad advice, that lack of guidance, that lack of guardrails, it's that lack of boundaries. On the other hand, what started in the upper middle class 10, 15 years ago, and has trickled down to the middle class and the working class today, is a lack of independence, a lack of an overscheduling, almost in a response to
Amen to that.
You get to decide whatever you want to be, but this is your schedule. And it's going to go from school to practice, to tutoring, to recital. And part of it is, I think, a fear. In the newsroom, as a journalist, I remember there were some editors who hated it if the reporter was just kind of walking around Capitol Hill, checking out sources. They always wanted to be on the ball. That was always a sign of insecurity. And I think that's what parents have going on here too. A little bit of insecurity. I need to make sure my kid is getting optimized every single moment.
Oh my goodness.
And so the counter story that I have is last year we had our two younger girls were 5th grade and kindergarten. We had just moved to Virginia and we were walking distance from our parish school for the first time. And my wife had to pick up some of the other kids. Were a bit scattered because of Catholic schools. And so at 3:00, my 5th grader would walk home the kindergartner. That's the cutest thing in the world. These two kids walking home, both in their uniforms. And then they would just hang out. Now, I could point to benefits. Well, now the middle girl gets to be the big sister, so she's reading to her little sister, which helps her read. What really matters is they spent time together. Yeah. There was no enrichment. There was no clubs. One season we signed them up for volleyball just because her friend was on it. But we realized that hour a day that they got walking home, being a big sister, being a little sister, reading to one another, playing with sand, making up totally pointless games, that was incredibly valuable. And that was an eye-opening moment for me because I was already writing this book, but that was like that independent, unsupervised play. That's exactly one of the things that kids are lacking these days. Go wander, come home when the street lights come on.
You know what? That's exactly what my mom told me as a kid. So, what's old is new again, because we moved from the Bronx to Fair Lawn, New Jersey. It was suburbia, but to me, it was like the country. And we were told that during the summertime at 10 o'clock, go to the yard. We played stickball, wiffle ball. We played games like pick up and slaughter with the neighborhood kids. And the rule was come home for lunch. You had to come home for lunch in the summertime. And then when the street light came on, we had to be back in the house again, which was awesome because I got back to the house. Summertime it's after 8, but then my mom and dad were watching the Yankee game. So we watched baseball together. So this idea of time together, right? I mean, this idea of time. And I'll just say this, just to make this point. So I have a lot of good kids on this 10U baseball team. And there's one kid who's only shown up 5 times. And he's never played before. He's a good athlete. And I asked him yesterday during the game, I'm like, hey, why haven't you been here? And he said, well, Monday is chorus, Tuesday is tennis, Wednesday's taekwondo, Thursday I come to baseball, Friday something else, and then Saturday is baseball. And so he is participating in 3 or 4 additional activities besides baseball. And the first thing I thought of was, when does he spend time with his mom? And so this idea of time spent together, I think, is brilliant. And I know you don't mean it to be brilliant, but sometimes the most obvious thing in front of us is the most brilliant thing in front of us. Let me ask you this, and before we started, I kind of threw this at you. Who are the best advocates for families and children and family policy?
I mean, the first thing is you do have to put yourself in strong institutions of civil society. You do have to belong to things. But ultimately, it comes down to the parents. And I think we err as a culture in both directions sometimes. Sometimes we disregard the value of parents, and sometimes we overestimate the ability of parents to do it all. And we can make this mistake at almost the exact same time. So again, I think a lot of school systems these days see their job as almost tearing kids away from their parents. Montgomery County, Maryland, that I fled,
where I live.
Yes. So they are at war with a lot of, interestingly, largely immigrant population. So, Ethiopian Christians, Muslim immigrants, who are upset that to get around the fact that your kids could opt out of the sex ed stuff, they started pushing the sexually explicit and gender ideology into the English class. And then when some parents objected to this, the school board said, it's not our job to listen to bigots. That's what they think. That's what they think the school system's job is to pull kids away from their parents who might be somewhat conservative and religious of any stripe. So that's on one side. On the other side is, you see this with the debates over cell phones and smartphones. A lot of parents are like, smartphones are really not good for our kids. Maybe we should regulate them. Maybe the schools should ban them. And then one response is, no, the parents just shouldn't give it. You're a bad parent. If you think this harms your kids and you gave it to them, you're a bad parent. That's assigning too much to parents. What we do to help keep smartphones away from our kids is we conspire with other parents. We send them to kids that basically ban cell phones and that actually also tell the parents not to give them smartphones and put them on social media. In other words, every family needs support. The nuclear family is it's the heart of society, but the heart by itself can't do it. I always say, a wise woman once said, it takes a village to raise a child. Now, Hillary might have meant the Department of Human Services as a village, yes. But I mean these institutions, the church, the school, the neighborhood, the in-laws, the brothers and the extended family. And so both of those need to be emphasized at once. Parents are going to be the most important, and they are going to need societal support. That's one of the main messages of my book, is that I think modern world has decided, okay, well, having kids is just another choice, right? It's like you decided to get a boat. It's your responsibility to take care of your boat. If you were like, Tim, there's some problem with the carburetor, I'd help you. But eventually I'd say, Jerry, you're the one who bought the boat. But nobody should ever say that to you when you have kids. Yes. It's all of our responsibilities to help with the kids.
To that end, or in this topic, you mentioned housing earlier, economics. We've lost this tradition in America of multi-family generations living together. And when I grew up, my grandmother lived with us my entire life, from a little boy till until she passed away when I was in 8th grade. I'm used to that. Even today, my sister and her husband, they live with my parents, partly because of economics, but also partly because my mom and dad are in their 80s and they need help. And so this is a good solution. There's challenges to that, and there's personal space, and there's and these sort of issues. But what do you make of that, where we've lost this tradition of generations living together and helping each other?
We overvalue privacy. I studied Aristotle in college, and I really believe that there's sort of like a middle level that's the appropriate level of almost everything. Some cultures have zero privacy. In Sicily, like you could be 60, but if your mom's still alive, she's still in charge of your life, right?
Yeah. The Irish too, my goodness. Right?
The American culture of today, I think, errs too much on the side of that. Like in Israel, so I went to Israel in reporting for this book, and I learned that basically everybody gets help from the baby's grandma. And they'll grouse about it a little because you also get lots of advice. My friend Phil Klein, who you may know, National Review, former examiner, sure. He says when he's pushing his baby stroller around Israel, strangers are like telling him how to be a better dad with like that slight scolding but still loving tone. Not like you're horrible. It's like, oh my gosh, you got to cover up that baby. He's going to get sunburned. And so there's a right level of privacy, and we err right now on the side of too much. And that's related to this worship of autonomy, whether in the individual, which, by the way, gets in the way of marriage. If you're like, I'm a totally autonomous, sovereign human being, nobody gets to tell me what to do, right, your marriage is not going to last. Or if it's just on the level of the couple, that they don't, you do want a home to be something of a sanctuary. And so if there's 40 people in a really big home, it wouldn't have the same home feeling. But that idea of multi-generational living. Now, I will say it's on a comeback driven by economic needs. Yeah. I talked to realtors who said actually a lot of builders are deliberately building homes for multi-generational, which again has the right level of privacy. Grandma is above the garage, has her own bathroom, her own entrance, her own exit, and gets to come in the house whenever she wants, but doesn't have, little Connor constantly, jumping on her lap if she doesn't want to, or she's in the living room and all the kids are climbing on her lap if she wants to.
So, one thing we're experiencing, again, we're a family of 7, 5 kids, and my wife and I, and our grocery bills are approaching our mortgage payment. We send all our children to private Catholic school because we don't trust the curricula in the public schools, the discipline, and other such things. Everything from heating to gasoline for the car, groceries, everything is more expensive, and it's not just a little more expensive. You mentioned you fled from Montgomery County. I'm here. In Maryland, just take one state that we're familiar with. It costs $26,000 more these last 12 months for normal goods and services for the average household compared to just 3 years ago. Now, a lot of this is inflation, and we can talk politics, Biden, not Biden, whatever. But the fact is, it's more expensive. Life is more expensive. Inflation, it seems to me, with deficits and debt in terms of $34 trillion in debt, $2 trillion deficits. Inflation is going to be I hope not, but it looks like a permanent tax on families. What do we do about this? How do we advocate, but also how do we deal with it so we can have, it's easy, right? Have children, but what if you can't afford afford the children.
Yeah. So a couple things on that. Inflation, if you look at it in the real abstract, shouldn't be that big of a problem because wages tend to go up along with prices. And in fact, that's a big part of what's happening with if you took out housing, which is a huge thing to take out. But if you take out housing, wages are definitely rising along with the cost of living. The problem about saying this to a family is that it's a big ship. If you're solo, you're on like a little speedboat that can move around like that. You can change jobs, move to another city, jump. Because to get that raise, you can't just be like, boss, I need a raise my grocery. You often need to jump to another. So the solo individual has less inertia and can jump around to get the raise when housing prices go up. Right. Families have more inertia. You want to stay where you are because that's where your kids go to school, or maybe grandma's living above the garage. You can't just jump to a new startup when you're on the hook for five tuitions. And so for all of these reasons, anything that's sort of rapid change is particularly bad for families, for the people who are less able to just totally change their course of action. So that's why the inflation, which some people say, hey, look, we needed to spend all that money. It was COVID or whatever, we could get into the politics about it, but all of that money spent in 2020 and 2021 is what caused this inflation. And some people say, well, again, you make up for it. Well, this gets to the problem of our policymakers and our journalistic class don't think about what it's like to be in a family. How many times you read an article and you're like, has the writer and all the editors never heard of kids?
Yes.
There's one like environmental.
I did that 20 times today. I read 20 articles today and I thought that. Yes.
There's this one environmentalist article you see every year. It's nobody needs a lawn. And the point is like a lot of lawns are just decorative and ornamental. Fine, whatever. But it's like you don't even use it. I was like, have you ever met a kid? Like you can see the lefty and righty batters boxes worn into my lawn.
So my Liam is pitching now, and he literally made a mound and got my measuring my roll tape, my measuring tape, 46 feet, put a home plate down, and we got him a pitcher's net.
Nice.
And there's where he walks back and forth from the net is a path. You know what I mean? So yes, you're right.
And then I saw it about cars. Somebody's like, in the future, nobody will need to own a car because we'll just have these robot cars on control. I thought, where do you keep like all the pool stuff during the summer? You keep it in the trunk of your minivan.
You keep it in the car, in the back. So when you go shopping, you open it up and all the noodles and everything fall.
These are things that normal people don't talk about, but every parent knows.
Yes.
And so if our planners, our policymakers, and our journalists don't think about kids, they can be like, oh, inflation's no big deal.
I know, we're gonna wrap up, and I mean, my goodness, I could talk to you forever about this. In fact, I will talk to you forever about this because I'm the host of a radio show and another podcast too, and we're gonna get you on those. Housing costs, just quickly. Mm-hmm. So, I grew up in the New York metro area, and I got married in the New York metro area, and my wife and I, we had good jobs. We both worked at the time. And we made good salaries. We could not afford a home in Westchester County, New York, Bergen County, New Jersey. And we wanted to be near family and jobs and such. Now, we were fortunate in that my job moved me down to the DC area, and the housing, believe it or not, in DC, the housing costs were better. But there was a period in our marriage where we thought we'd never own a home.
Yeah.
So what do you tell young married couples who want families and they look at the price of a home? What counsel do you have for them?
Well, it's an example of the broader thing, which is you can't wait till you're ready to have kids because you will never be ready to have kids.
Again, that's twice you're brilliant on the program today. Yeah, you sound a little bit like my mother, by the way. You can't wait.
Yeah, my wife and I were currently renting. There's a lot of things suboptimal about that with family because, again, you want the permanence. Our landlords are moving back in a year. We're going to get kicked out. That's not optimal, but we're making do, and you're going to have to make do, and you can't wait until you're ready. And that if you put off having a family, or if you decide not to do it because you don't think you're ready, you cannot understand what you're sacrificing, what you're giving up. Until it's somebody used the analogy of you're on the other side of the lake. I think you're on the other side of the ocean. You can't even see what's here. You can't see the difficulties and frustrations, but you can't see the love and the meaning. It's incomprehensible. I mean, I have friends who are like libertarian, social liberal. They were always cursing like all the pro-family stuff. And then one of them once tweeted out when she had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, she's like, okay, I'm going to admit that, well, so maybe the social conservatives should have just said, you'll never experience love like this before, after, in any other way in your life, instead of being all preachy. I was like, okay, fine. If that's not preachy, then that's not preachy. You can't wait till you're ready, because it might never happen.
Again, only because you could have been my brother around our dining room table growing up on a Sunday after church. But here's the thing too. So we had our Bridget, and again, the love that happens it's real, and it happens, and you're different. But when we were having our second, I realized that the love multiplies.
It doesn't divide.
And the third, and the thing is that like our capacity to love is infinite. And with each child, we loved more. In fact, I'll say this: when I have faith. I go to church. I raise my family to believe. But there are days I have doubts, and there are days when I wonder, oh my goodness, really? Why did you put all this in motion? And how God reminds me that He's real by pointing to my children, because the love I have for them, I think it's supernatural. I think it's something that's a blessing that He's given to me, and I think that's evidence of eternity is the love you have for your kids. Now, again, I'm gonna let you go. Not everyone has children, but regardless, everyone can participate in community, participate in and making sure that our culture is kid ready and kid friendly. What do you say to those who don't have children?
Yeah. And
what's their role?
Not everybody is called to children, right? Like
right.
we're Catholic Church still, and will always believe that priests and are not called to have kids, and we have all sorts of other religious orders, and we've always believed there's a place for those who are not disposed towards and called to parenthood, and but that doesn't mean they're not called to help society raise children. It is, in fact, society's job to help parents raise children. It is, in fact, society's job to look after children, to be the youth sports coach, to just support parents. I have one of the demographers I quote in this book a ton. His name is Lyman Stone, and he and his wife for a long time had a lot of trouble having kids. What they did in those years, their late 20s, early 30s, was really pushed their friends with kids to go out to dinner and said, we'll babysit your kids. We'll feed them, put them to bed, and wait for you guys to come home. And I just thought that was a great vocation that they had before they had their own kids. And then and we get it mostly from grandmas, but also from sort of favorite aunts who never had kids. People who will just see us maybe struggling a little with the kids in the grocery store, or maybe having a great time, and they'll just walk up and be like, it is absolutely great what you're doing. Yeah. My wife gets a lot of dirty looks. You shouldn't have had that many kids. But as a dad, you get it all the time. But even the moms get it sometimes. It's like, keep doing what you're doing. It's worth it.
This is really good stuff. Everyone should pick your book up, no matter the stage in your family. There's stuff I've read your book. There's stuff in it that even as an older dad, I'm learning, but even more than that, you've reminded me of things that I want to pass on to my kids, but also to, I run into millennial parents now. My sister has three young ones, all under 7, and I'm 10. I'm 10 years older than she is, and so there's wisdom in this book. This show, again, The Business of America is that, the business of America, the doers, the makers, the innovators, the entrepreneurs. Tim, in a very real way, you are both an entrepreneur in terms of how families are the business of America, But in another way, you're kind of a witness. You're giving witness to a truth that we don't hear enough of. And so I hope that in the future you come back on the show. For those who, again, you're not supposed to tell about the sausage making. We have some tech issues today on the show, and Tim has been very patient. So thank you for that. You're a good man.
Thank you.
But we're going to have you back on. I want to have you on the radio program and also another podcast. And I want you more in the pages of Real Clear because your thinking is real clear thinking on families and on other issues. So Timothy Patrick, your name is Patrick, isn't it? Right?
Yes.
You're
one time, me here. Yeah.
I'm Gerald Patrick. I have Liam Patrick. You're Timothy Patrick. So from all the Patricks today, thank you. Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Business of America. Thank you. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
This has been the Federal Newswire's Business of America podcast, hosted by Jerry Rogers. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream